Thank you so much, folks. It's always lovely being tail gun Charlie at the PIPC presentations. I did the last presentation on a Friday at the last conference as well. I have to talk to Geeta about this. So, folks, before I dive in, I just want to share with you kind of a perspective that I use when I talk to my clients globally. And what I say to them is, you need to understand that technology is just an enabler. The part that's scary is what it is enabling. Let me explain this to you. Technology is basically doubling every 18 years. So the ability to transfer information is doubling every 18 months. The ability to store information is doubling every 18 months. The ability to process information is doubling every 18 months. And the ability to collect information is doubling every 18 months. As this ability doubles in terms of capability, the cost per unit is halving. And as the capability doubles, the size is halving. So I want you to just walk with me on this. If you look at this exponentially, and if you keep halving something every 18 months, you get a curve that gradually tends to zero. In other words, our ability to collect, send, process, and store information is gradually dropping. The cost is dropping to zero, and the capability is rising to infinity. Now, why is that scary? That's scary because you are now able to create devices that keep getting smaller. Eventually, they get so small, that you almost can't see them. They're all connected and they're all intelligent because we can deploy AI onto this. We have sensors. There are now more sensors available in the world than human beings. Right? There's something like 60 billion sensors in the world. And the reason that we had to move to IP version 6 is because we ran out of IP addresses. We couldn't connect. There weren't enough IP addresses to connect all these sensors. Right? So now we've increased the IP address range. It's now the number is so huge, I can't even describe the number to you. It's a lot of zeros. Why did we do that? We did that because we needed a lot of IP addresses. Why do we need a lot of IP addresses? Because we've got trillions, quadrillions of sensors. Everything has sensors. My car has something like 50 sensors. My watch has about 8 or 9 sensors. My cell phone has 25 sensors. So when I'm sitting in my car, I have probably 100 to 150 sensors. So why is this a problem? This is a problem because we're about to enter, and we speak about this a lot. We often talk about confidentiality, security, and privacy. We're about to enter the age of the end of privacy. What does this mean? It means we're entering the age of what is known as smart dust. Smart dust is basically, it's a piece of dust that is actually a chip that has sensors on it that is totally connected with 5G to the network. In other words, everything, I can sprinkle thousands of pieces, millions, billions of pieces of this dust all over the world, and actually nothing that happens in the world is outside of my purview. So you really need to understand that's where we're going to. So for the Liverpool supporters, you are never going to walk alone again, right? And you're also never going to be alone in the shower. Right? So you kind of need to understand what this means. This means that the age of privacy is over. So we always talk about privacy and personal information, and all these acts are being passed. But what no one ever talks about is that the power of technology inexorably is taking us towards a different kind of singularity. And this is a very concerning singularity from banking, from insurance, from healthcare, because it means that basically it's going to be almost impossible to have any secrets anymore. So how do we protect that? So what I wanted to do is to talk about some of the trends. We're going to talk about where tech meets tactics, and we'll talk about how to navigate this. And I'm going to give you case studies of what different companies are doing, and I'll share with you some examples of what works and what doesn't work. So I'll be talking about a few things. I'll talk about some of the big banking trends, and I'm going to show you what's happening with Klarna in terms of AI. We'll talk about a payments AI case. I'm then going to talk about some trends in payments, commerce, and identity. Then we will do a double deep dive into BlackRock, JP Morgan, and I'll show you how they are starting to use some of this technology. And then we'll close out by just talking about a few lessons for us. So we've got this very perverse situation. The very perverse situation is that we now have a single bank It's not even a bank, by the way. It's a non-banking financial institution. Is BlackRock now manages $20 trillion in global assets. Now, that's actually quite scary if you think the total value of GDP in the world is about $80 trillion. So one entity is now managing a quarter of the wealth in the world. Now, that's an astonishing concentration of risk when you consider that what the regulators have been trying to do for years is to actually reduce concentration of risk. We've had the opposite effect. So that's the first big challenge that we've got in the world is we've got these unintended outcomes because of the way we've structured regulation. The second unintended outcome is item 1, which is actually item 2. So the regulator's quest to eliminate risk is actually creating new risk. And the one risk we have is this enormous concentration risk. 7 companies are now making an astonishing part of the S&P 500. The S&P 500 was set up to be a diversified index. And in fact, the last thing you have now is diversification because 7 companies make up such a big chunk of that index. You don't have diversification. If you buy that index, you do not have a diversified portfolio anymore. You're heavily exposed to 7 companies. The other perverse outcome of this is that regulators around the world have put huge pressure on banks in terms of the way that they manage credit. What this has done is this has hamstrung banks globally, and this has led to a very unusual situation where now non-banks have rapidly grown into the credit space because banks have been handcuffed, and now you're finding an increasing amount of credit being issued by non-banks. Now, why is that a concern? That's a concern because non-banks do not fall under banking regulation. Non-banks are not governed by the central bank, and non-banks are not governed by the banking regulator because they're non-banks. You have no control over them. So if you start looking at where credit is growing, the biggest growth in credit worldwide is in non-banks. So I just wanted to share with you some of these unintended outcomes. These things are all happening in the background. Nobody's talking about any of this. And of course, so that's just one of the trends. I've spoken about technology. I've spoken about the regulator's quest to minimize risk. Scale is now becoming very, very important. If you take a bank, you take any South African bank, on average, a South African bank has about 180 to 200 customers per employee. My banking clients in India are running at about 350 customers per employee. Citibank is running at 1,000 customers per. And if you look at Revolut, you look at Revolut's running at about 3,000. If you look at Nubank in Brazil, they're running at about 4,000, 5,000 customers per employee. And if you go and look at someone like Alipay or Alibaba Payments, you'll find that they are running at 120,000 customers per employee. So in other words, scale matters. And the new digital players have this astonishing scale, right? They have very few staff, and using very few staff, they're able to actually scale across a huge number of customers. Customers now expect banks to look like Google's landing page. Google's landing page has one color. The dominant color on Google's landing page is white. There's only one function on Google's landing page, which is search. You go to OpenAI, there's only one thing you can do, and you can ask a question. That's all you can do. There's nothing else. There's no other buttons. That is what customers want. Why doesn't my bank look like this? Because this is how everything else looks. Everything else in my life looks like this. I've got this weird banking app with like dozens of options. Right? Why can't I just have a banking app that I can just say, help me bank? And it should say, what do you want to do? Well, I want to transfer money. Fine. Okay, do it for me. Right, so I'm going to talk about agentic AI just now and the huge change that's coming to commerce and payments because of agentic AI. So customers' experiences are now moving to say, why doesn't my bank look like Google or OpenAI? Product strategies, now we're moving toward fully integrated products, a different way of working. And AI, the original shift for AI and technology and digital transformation was to get waste out. And so if you look at banks were really working very hard to get waste out to the point where BBVA Bank, and BBVA Bank is a bank with about 80 to 90 million customers, it's a traditional universal bank. They are now sitting at 90 million customers. Their cost-to-income ratio is about to break through 40%. Now, for a bank with that many customers in that many countries, it's the biggest bank in Turkey, in Mexico, Latin America, Brazil, biggest bank in Spain, Portugal. For a bank like this, to have a cost-to-income ratio below 40% is astonishing. You can't drop it anymore. So throwing money at reducing cost is no longer a logical thing to do. There's no business case. There's no business case for throwing money at automation. So what are they doing? They're moving from waste out to value in. So everyone's saying, we need to use the technology to add more value, not to take cost out. So the cost game is now over for banks that are sitting at 40% cost to income ratio. More and more of the world is moving towards open source. If you are using the internet, 90% of what you're using on the internet is open source. All the code, TCP/IP is open source. Akamai is an open source system. A lot of the web application servers are open source. Most of the big banks are making huge bets on Linux servers. And so the most data centers, one of the most popular operating systems in data centers in banks is Linux, which is open source. So you're starting to see this really interesting shift that we have. The world's most common coding language in the future, the most popular coding language in the future is going to be English. Because you'll be able to go into OpenAI, in fact, you can already do it, and say, build me an e-commerce site that sells cameras. I'd like you to go and pick for me 5,000 cameras, put them onto the site. I want you to design it so that an average person is able to find a camera to buy in 3 minutes. Make sure that the criteria are on the left-hand side. Give me navigation on the top, give me some breadcrumbs. I'd like a subscription service. I'd also like you to give me a shopping basket, and I'd like a checkout system that enables 20 of the top payment systems in the world, and I would also like you to have a rating service. You'll get the entire code for this. So you've just written a request in English, and you get the entire code for your e-commerce business given to you. All you have to do is deploy it into the runtime environment. So no one's going to be coding anymore. So anyone who gave you advice 5 years ago that all executives should learn how to code was wrong. So now in all that time spent learning how to code, right? You don't need it, right? Because you can just go to OpenAI, it'll give you all the code, and it works. So finally, and the final point is, all the big platform companies have reached the point where they've hit the innovator's dilemma. The innovator's dilemma is, I've given people everything they want. There's no more services that they want. Google can't give me anything else. Amazon can't give me anything else. Apple can't give me anything else. You've now hit the law of diminishing returns. Therefore, all we have is AI. And if AI doesn't work, we've got a real problem here because there's nothing else people want to buy from us. And we've already got 99% market share. So if you've got 99% market share and there's no more services that you're going to add, you've got a real problem. You hit the end of the road. So that's a challenge, and the business case for AI hasn't been defined yet. So I just wanted to share that with you because there seems to be a bit of a wall or a cliff, depending on how you look at this, that's sitting in a few years out from where we are today. So certainly some credit issues coming, and there's a fundamental shift happening in e-commerce. And I want to just point out that nobody wakes up in the morning to make a payment. People are always a payment is embedded in something else, right? So a payment is something that we have to do in order to get the thing we really want. And what we are doing is we're changing the way in which we get the thing that we want, and payments will disappear into the background. It will be something that happens in the background that you're not going to see anymore. It'll just happen because you'll be able to, you see, because we are getting to the end of the smartphone. And if you look at what Sam Altman did, Sam Altman bought a company with no product and no revenue for about $5 billion. No product, no revenue. It happened to be started by a guy called John Ivey. And the only reason he bought it is John Ivey was the chief design engineer for Apple. And John Ivey was building the replacement of the smartphone. He basically said smartphones are dead. You will not need smartphones. You will not need apps. And you will not need app stores. It's completely illogical to use apps and app stores in the world of the future because I'll be able to go to my phone and say, please buy me a gift for my wife's birthday. I need some flowers. You know her color. She needs some chocolates. You know what she likes. Buy it and make sure it arrives here at this address. I want to fetch it there and bring it home and make sure it's gift wrapped. That's not an app. You understand? Everything will get done. It's called agentic AI. I'll talk more about agentic AI shortly. The source code and the entire framework, design framework for this new protocol has just been dropped, and I'm going to show you who built it. And when you see who builds it, you understand the world of payments is about to change dramatically. You will not see payments. Payments will be invisible. It's like climate control in your car. You don't see it. You know it's there. You press the button and it happens. So what's happening? We've got AI automation giving us smarter operations. We've got cloud banking giving us flexibility and speed, and we've got blockchain. Now, you're probably very surprised to see blockchain because we all thought it was dead. But the way that I'm going to describe this to you is I'm going to talk about fireworks. When I said, because Gita said to me, Herman, this last presentation on a Friday, it better be fireworks. So I'm going to show you some fireworks, and you'll understand just now why I'm using the analogy of fireworks. So if you look at AI, take wholesale banking, we're already starting to see that AI transforming wholesale banking in multiple areas. Customer service is being taken over. And if you look at this is JP Morgan. JP Morgan and AI completed 360,000 hours of finance work in just a few seconds. Okay, this is JP Morgan. This is one of the biggest banks in the world. Just published this and said, wow, folks, it's done. This part of the working domain has been automated. So that's a powerful impact, a powerful statement. The CEO of JP Morgan, Diamond, made the comment that they are spending $2 billion a year on AI, and the payback is $2 billion. They've just made that statement now. So they're spending $2 billion, and they're getting a payback of $2 billion. So that's a one-year payback on the investment that they're making on AI. If you look at the wholesale value chain, these are some percentages, just showing you what the impact of AI is likely to be on different elements of the value chain. So it's very clear that AI is going to have big impact. We're starting to see some solid outcomes. And one of the companies that led this was a company called Klarna. And Klarna, for those of you that know, is a buy now, pay later service. If you're shopping on the internet and you get to a point where you want to check out, you'll often get asked, would you like to buy now, pay later? Klarna is the biggest in the world. So Klarna basically underwent massive growth, millions of customers, over 100 million by now, 2 million transactions a day, and they basically were preparing for an IPO. I went to Stockholm in 2015, and I had the pleasure of actually meeting the CEO, who at the time was a very, very arrogant young man, and I thought, I don't know if this guy's going to make it. Well, he made it. Okay, very, very impressive business that they built out of Sweden. Klarna has this consistent track record of growth. It's grown faster than e-commerce has grown. So this company's done very, very well. And it IPO'd 2 weeks ago. So what they then did is they then announced that what we're going to do is they're going to replace a lot of the people who are doing credit underwriting. They're going to replace them with 700 workers are going to be replaced by this AI engine. And they're going to cut 10% of their workforce using AI. Made the announcement. This Klarna's AI assistant was amazing. So there are 150 million customers. It's now engaging all of these customers, and it's managing tasks like multilingual customer service, managing refunds, managing returns, and giving you advice on how to borrow responsibly. So quite a powerful thing. They claimed amazing success, right? They said superior experiences, better prices, more interesting challenges for our employees. I don't know what that means. Incredibly excited about this launch, and we want to re-emphasize society and politicians to consider this carefully, and we believe a considerate, informed, and steady stewardship will be critical to navigate through this transformation of our societies. It's a very unusual comment to see at the end of a comment, of an announcement, when you've just announced the retrenchment of 700 staff, right? That's an astonishing thing to put in there, saying to the regulators and to society, you better start thinking about this. This is coming. So it was amazing. They had 2.3 million conversations. 2/3 of all of their chats went through the system. It did the equivalent of the work of 700 people. It led to a 25% drop in repeat inquiries. Was on a par they claimed it was on a par with human call center agents, available in 33 languages. And you could resolve it in less than 2 minutes compared to 11 minutes previously. So they said, we think there's going to be a $40 million USD improvement. And on the back of this, they planned an IPO. The IPO was planned at about 60 billion. That was going to be the value of the IPO. Then this came out. The CEO then said, actually, it didn't work. Said, as cost, unfortunately, seems to have been a too predominant evaluation factor, what you end up having is lower quality. And he directly linked AI-driven austerity measures to degraded customer service. The value of the company plummeted. In the next funding round, the value of the company dropped by 90% because of the single event. Okay, this massive plummeting. All the investors said, "Wow, we were going to value you at over $60 billion. You're now worth less than 10." So This is a classic example of what's known as the doorman fallacy. The doorman fallacy says if you were walking in New York City and you saw a doorman, you would think, you'd watch this doorman and you'd say, this is so silly. Because all this doorman does is open your car door and then he opens the door of the building. And he often doesn't open your car door. And now cars can open their doors by themselves. And all we have to do is create an automated system that to open the door when you walk in, that we don't need the doorman. And the problem with this analysis is that's not all that the doorman does. You see, the doorman also keeps away riffraff. He increases the image of the place. He keeps you safe, keeps you secure, talks to you, guides you, greets you by name. And this is the challenge that you have with most AI implementations. A lot of what humans do is not actually documented. And so when you start putting AI in, most of the implementations are experiencing this problem, which is this doorman fallacy. They've left out a huge chunk of what people do, and they've suffered because of this. A summary of the impact: $39 billion drop in valuation. Credit risk, there was a serious problem. They actually experienced massive increases in non-performing loans, and the IPO had to be delayed. So it's actually quite a paradox. We thought that AI would help this company. They rushed in. They were first movers. They implemented this. They made this very brave announcement, and they lost $39 billion in their IPO. They then finally IPO'd 2 weeks ago. I think they IPO'd for 18 billion. They were going to IPO for over 60. They IPO'd for 18. So this just gives you a sense of the challenge that you have. So the two questions you really have to ask yourself as we go down this road is the technology ready? And are the customers and employees ready? And we often don't ask those two questions. So two very important questions. The few other learnings here is that digital transformation is actually not about technology engineering. It's also about social engineering. You also have to prepare customers and you have to prepare employees for this. A good example of this is COVID. You know, COVID came and hit us, and within 2 weeks, all of us were working from home. How did we do that? Worldwide, billions of people were working from home, and the reality was that the ability to work from home had been there for 20 years. You go back to 2006, right? 2006, we all had laptops. 2006, we had Blackberries. 2006, we all had that weird red dongle from Vodacom that we could stick into our laptops. We were all sitting at Juicy Lucy's. Remember Juicy Lucy? With our laptops, our red dongles. Remember that? We were using something called Outlook Web Access. Our email was following us. We were road warriors. We were road warriors, sitting over there working. But nobody worked from home. The technology existed for 20 years. So people don't change because something is possible. They don't change because something is important. They change because something is convenient, urgent, or mandatory. In other words, social engineering. This is exactly when I was talking to Pradeep earlier, those of you that listened, I made this point that both PIPC in Brazil and UPI in India, the only reason they had exponential growth is because of COVID. Okay, so I don't know how we're going to get exponential growth in South Africa. So some of the key takeouts, folks, is be careful about using AI for replacement. Enhancement is the way to go. Augment human underwriters, don't replace them. And you must look at ways of providing deeper insights to existing customers, and they can help you with things like document processing. So take a hybrid approach. AI is really good at managing high volumes of routine services, but make sure there's a clear pathway for customers to escalate. Do not remove humans completely because you need human judgment. So, and don't let cost cutting be the reason that you do this. So I'm going to skip. So basically, to use my firework example, basically, AI is a big bang, short fuse technology. So it's going to have a big impact in the short term, right? So you're going to start to see, or already we're starting to see a massive reduction in jobs for interns and recent graduates. There's a massive plummeting. We're not seeing this kind of impact on people who've had jobs for a longer period, but certainly new young people entering the workforce have already taken a big hit. All of those jobs are vanishing, and the reason they're vanishing is that AI can basically perform like a young intern, and that's what most young graduates do, and we've already hit that spot. Right? So basically, we were not hiring young interns globally. Now let's look at blockchain. You're probably wondering, why is blockchain here? Well, it turns out that blockchain took a long while to get started, but we can already start to see some major progress being made with blockchain. We've already seen a Bank of New York Mellon and Goldman Sachs are launching tokenized money market funds. So what that means is I can tokenize anything. I can tokenize a building. So basically, I can tokenize a Picasso. So if you wanted to buy a Picasso, you now can, right? So what does a Picasso cost? $40 million. Okay, so I'll take a Picasso, and I will create 40 million shares, tokens, in this Picasso. Now all of you can buy this Picasso. So all of you can now claim to own a Picasso, because you own 1 out of 40 million pieces in this Picasso painting. I didn't cut it up. It's still there. I tokenized it, right? And I broke it down into 40 million pieces. Each of you can go out and buy one for $1. Now, what have I just done? I've taken an asset that has got no liquidity. You cannot sell a $40 million Picasso. Nobody's going to buy it. There's maybe 5 people in the world that can buy it. Suddenly, I've turned it into something that 3 billion people can buy. Well, that creates enormous liquidity, right? Suddenly, this becomes tradable. You've created a market, and we are doing the same thing now because commercial real estate is very difficult for people to invest in commercial real estate. We've now tokenized commercial real estate. We've tokenized money market funds. And so blockchain is starting to find the use cases for all of these things. And blockchain is suddenly coming into its own. So this is a big bang, long fuse technology. So it's going to be a big bang in the long run, but it's going to be a long fuse to actually get there. We're already starting to see a number of these rolling out. Walmart is using it for the cold chain storage, and we're seeing a number of trade finance companies doing the same thing. The next thing we're starting to see is a big impact in the payment space. Just show you, if we look at digital currencies, for example, we're already starting to see CBDCs rolling out globally. And the reason, I know Pradeep says he doesn't want to see one in South Africa, but the reality is a CBDC and a stablecoin is questioning what is money, and importantly, you see, I can email you a stablecoin. I can't email you money, but I can email you a stablecoin. Not only can I email you a stablecoin, you can also keep your stablecoin on your computer. You don't need a bank account. You don't need a wallet. You don't need a prepaid card. So you see, the CBDCs remove all this friction because I can move this thing. It's like sending an email. Now, the minute you do that, you're creating a currency that's free to get, free to keep, free to use, and importantly, free to move. Now, the minute you can make something free to move, you've really created a brand new product here. So all of a sudden, we're starting to see a lot of interest roll out in different forms of payment worldwide. And so this question of what is stablecoins, what is e-money, what's backed, what's not backed. And as you've seen with the Genius Act, there's quite a big move now in America to move towards stablecoins, because stablecoins solve a number of problems around removing friction from the system. The other thing that you've heard is that Bitcoin is now forming part of the strategic reserve in America. And the main reason for this, and people don't realize this, but everyone thinks that Bitcoin transactions can't be tracked. Bitcoin transactions are not anonymous, they are pseudonymous. Pseudonymous means gives you pseudo anonymity. So it looks like it's anonymous, but it's actually not. Because every transaction on Bitcoin is written onto the blockchain, and because I don't know if you know, the Bitcoin runs on the blockchain, and every transaction on Bitcoin is visible to everyone. So you can see every transaction that's ever happened, right? The entire database of all Bitcoin transactions that have ever occurred is just a few gigabytes. It's about 100 gigabytes. That's every transaction that's ever happened on Bitcoin. You can download the entire database of every transaction of Bitcoin yourself. You can download it. You can get a copy of it. Okay? And so the point about this is, why is this important? It's important because America's strategic Bitcoin reserve was created by stealing the money back from criminals. So the FBI gets involved whenever ransomware is paid, and what the FBI does is the FBI hacks into the hackers, finds the Bitcoin, and pulls it out. As long as they didn't take the Bitcoin and put it into a cold wallet, as long as it's still in a hot wallet, the FBI have been very successful in recovering Bitcoin. And this Bitcoin is about to be added to America's strategic reserve. Now you can start to understand how much that is that the FBI have been able to get back. Right? So you need to understand that there's a lot of issues around Bitcoin that haven't been solved yet. And the problem with Bitcoin is, in order to make a change in Bitcoin, you need to get consensus by a lot of people. Right? And there are basically 20,000 nodes, and 10,000 of them have to vote in favor of something before Bitcoin can be changed. So it's very difficult to change Bitcoin. If you think it's difficult to change the South African national payment system, go and try to change Bitcoin. Because 10,000 people have to agree. So I'm just going to skip some of these slides. So the point is, right now, Bitcoin is a very speculative instrument, but stable coins are not speculative. Stable coins, basically, because they're pegged to the national currency, they hold their value. So Bitcoin does not make sense as a currency because it varies too much. It costs way too much money to process. It burns way too much energy, and it takes too long. You can only get about 4 or 5 transactions a second on the Bitcoin system. Ethereum does over 5,000. Ripple does 25,000. Visa, MasterCard are doing 50 to 60,000. So basically, Bitcoin is too slow. It's too expensive. It consumes too much energy, and it's completely open. So it doesn't make sense to use it as a currency for payments, but it does make sense to use it for speculation because it's very volatile. In fact, so much so that all of these companies have gone out and bought Bitcoin. In fact, the major share of MicroStrategy, now they've changed their name now to Strategy. If you go and look at this listed company, the bulk of the value of this company is the Bitcoin that it holds. This is a software company that started buying Bitcoin. Now the bulk of the value of the company sits in Bitcoin, which means if you don't feel like buying Bitcoin, just go and buy the share in any of these companies. They're all sitting with lots of Bitcoin. You then immediately have exposure to this very speculative instrument. So long-term, folks, we can start to see that we've now got crypto ETFs. You can now buy an exchange-traded fund that allows you to get exposure to crypto. So you can now start to see that crypto is starting to become very accessible, very easy to use, and you're going to start to see both Bitcoin and Ethereum becoming very important. Ethereum processes far more transactions than Bitcoin does because Ethereum uses a fraction of the power of Bitcoin. So Ethereum is probably going to be the most powerful payment for corporate payments going forward because it's so efficient, it's so cheap, it's so quick, it's so scalable, and it doesn't use that amount of energy. So we certainly see these cryptocurrencies being big bang, long fuse. So this is another big bang, long fuse tech. Then we look at digital identity. And what's very clear is we're living in a world of very fragmented identity today, and the target is to move towards a single identity. The question is, what is it going to be? And right now, there's a big move towards biometrics. But what people don't realize is that you're choosing to base, identity has to be based on a secret. And if you base the secret on your face, well, that's something that everybody sees every day. That's your first problem is it's not exactly a secret. It's your first problem. Second problem is with AI, I'm able to create a very, very good fake of your face, which means the thing that you think is a secret is no longer a secret. I also have a copy of your secret. Now you may say, okay, I'm going to use fingerprints now. The problem with fingerprints is there's a very well-documented case of a person who wanted to demonstrate how vulnerable fingerprints were. They froze an image of a news feed, and they took an image, a high-definition image of a glass of wine, and on the glass of wine, they extracted the fingerprint of the lady who was holding that glass of wine. They then used that fingerprint, and they went to the lady and they said, we've got an exact replica of your fingerprint from a TV picture of a glass of wine that you were drinking. Now, do you really want to build your biometric future on this? So we really need to understand that you're living in a world, because technology is moving so quickly, it's very, very dangerous now to start building authentication systems based on fingerprints and biometrics. I'm thinking toes, because toes are not exposed. You're not touching anything. So any startups out there, toes is the future. Okay, I'm letting you know. It's got to be toes. I don't know what else it can be. I've been thinking about this a lot, as you can tell. So we're moving to this world where we really have to be very careful about what it is we're going to use as biometric, right? It may have to be your heartbeat or something like that, right? Because it can't be your face and it can't be your fingerprint, because those are very easy to copy. So digital identity, we're already starting to see massive adoption globally. We're starting to see digital adoption becoming the norm. As I said, I don't know if you were in the panel earlier, in India, they launched something called Aadhaar. Aadhaar is a QR code. They then converted that into something called DigiYatra, and DigiYatra allows you to board an aeroplane with your QR code. 45 million flights have been taken this year using DigiYatra. So I can't use it because I have a South African passport, but if you're a local Indian who has this Aadhaar identity, you can board an aeroplane just by opening up your phone and showing them a QR code. Just show them a QR code and you can board a plane. You can sign contracts with this thing. It's actually amazing. You can upload all of your documents, all of your policies, your identity, your birth documents, your graduate certificates. You can upload all of this into the cloud and access it using digital identity. Now, here's the powerful thing. Once it's been uploaded into the cloud, what they've now implemented is open credit enablement network. And what this allows you to do is this by law is now accessible by any credit provider in India. Right? So the minute I've uploaded all of my assets, all of my title deeds, my entire balance sheet, all of my policies, all of my share certificates, any credit provider with my permission, all they have to do is get my permission. The minute I give them my permission, anybody can make me an offer on credit. And this is going to radically change the world of credit. This is one of the reasons why, globally, non-banking credit providers are growing so fast. They're growing very fast, and governments love this because this is dramatically changing the level of credit in the world. There's not enough credit because people can't prove that they're creditworthy, which is really ironic. In India, the total value of gold in India is $4 trillion. That's more than any central bank in the world holds. And there's only about $20 trillion of gold in the world. So 1/4 of all the gold in the world is held in India. And not by a bank, it's held by ordinary people because gold is a fundamental part of the cultural ecosystem of India. And you give gold at weddings as part of the dowry. So Indian women are sitting with $4 trillion of gold that has not been monetized. They are the most borrowed segment in the world. You're sitting with $4 trillion of assets and no debt. This is exactly what happened under communism, because when communism ended in Russia, basically they had all these houses which were owned by the state. So the question is, what do we do with all these houses? So they basically passed a law that said if you're living in the house, it's yours. Which means every Russian person ended up with 100% equity in their house with zero mortgage. They became the most borrowed nation in the world, and I jumped on the plane because I was working for a bank in South Africa. We flew immediately to Russia to go and buy a bank. We said, we've got to go to Russia. I flew to Russia twice to go and buy a bank. We ended up not buying a bank, but we went there to do due diligence studies on 2 banks, purely because they were so under-borrowed. Right? So these nations are very heavily under-borrowed, and so you need to understand that what's starting to happen is this amazing liquidity explosion is happening globally. And you need to understand, as we start to unlock this with digital identity, all of a sudden people become individuals that we can lend to. And the more you lend, the more you drive consumption. So strategically, this is very important. I'm not going to walk through, but the digital identity is going to fundamentally shape our world going forward. I see this in country after country. Many startup companies are rushing into this space. Many applications, many platforms are diving into digital identity. And that's just more of the same. And in fact, the question becomes, what do we do after this? And so after digital identity, the problem we have is you can't only work on deterministic data for identity. Deterministic data says it's your fingerprint, it's your PIN number, it's your username, it's your password, it's your email address, it's your face, it's your retinal scan. Those are deterministic. Increasingly, we are going to be using probabilistic. And probabilistic says we're going to look at the way you type. We're going to look at the way you move. We're going to look at the time that you come in. We're going to look at your IP address. And we're going to start to sense behavior as a way of validating your identity. So it's probabilistic, not deterministic. We can now tell this is a very unusual transaction for you to be doing at this time to this vendor, etc. So we're going to start to see identity not just on deterministic, but on probabilistic as well. So this is another big bang, long fuse play. The next thing that we need to talk about is embedded commerce. This company, Domino Pizza, their share price grew 42 times in 10 years. 4,200% growth in the share price of Domino Pizza. It's a pizza company. How did this company grow? They grew because they started implementing embedded commerce way back in 2008. 2008 they started embedding it, so you can order Domino Pizza anywhere. On any of these devices. You can order a Domino Pizza on your Xbox. You can even order a Domino Pizza in your car. And in fact, if you use something called IFTTT, you can set it up so that it orders you a pizza without you having to order a pizza. You can say, if it's my birthday, send me a pizza. If it's my anniversary, send me a pizza. If it's my kid's birthday, send me a pizza. If it's my dog's birthday, send me a pizza. If it snows more than 3 inches, send me a pizza. If I'm still at work at 9 p.m., send me a pizza. If my team is playing, send me a pizza. If they discover aliens, send me a pizza. If it's snowing on Mars, send me a pizza. You can set it up. You set it up, and it basically sends you a pizza. If Domino's is running a special, order it. Now, this is the introduction to what's called embedded commerce is the first step towards agentic AI. You're basically setting deterministic conditions for an agent to act as if it's you. In other words, this thing is running. You're not keying in credit card details and PIN numbers. This thing is automatically ordering you a pizza, right, for you, because you gave it the conditions under which it can order you a pizza. You go to Tesco, it says, if it's a Thursday, please add milk to my shopping cart. You go to Best Buy, and it says, if the price drops by more than 10%, buy it. You go to eBay, and you can say, if something that I've looked at in the last 3 months drops by more than 15%, buy it. That's agentic AI. So what we've started to see is a lot of this move now towards handing over agency to technology. So we are saying, do this for me. I can't be watching all of these signals, but if something happens, if an airline drops their price, and if it's a Friday night flight to Cape Town, just buy it. Buy me two tickets. I'm just going to get it. Right? So you can start to see the way in which the world is changing with embedded care. This is a small bang, short fuse, right, as it stands. So these are Google announced this massive framework that now allows you to get rid of an app. It says, I want to fly to Croatia, book me an Uber, get me a visa, top up my foreign exchange, buy me an airline ticket, get me a hotel. You got my credit card, just go in. I want to go for this period of time, find me the best deal. Now, they just launched the protocol for building these tools. These are the companies that signed up for that protocol. So these companies are beginning to explore agentic AI, and they've all started to roll out solutions. In other words, you don't have to key in your payment details anymore. You just tell the agentic AI, this is what I want, and the agentic AI will go and process it. You'll notice these are all payment companies. Right? So payment companies, this is why I'm saying to you that payments are going to disappear into the background. Right? You're not going to see it anymore. It's like your carburetor, your fuel injection system. You need one, but that doesn't mean you have to open your bonnet to look at it and give it a hug every morning. Right? So you don't need to look at it. Payments are going to it's going to disappear. What was in application will disappear into infrastructure. This has happened everywhere, folks. Everything we've done, what starts in application ends up in infrastructure. Google is causing this agent-to-agent protocol, A2A. This was announced 2 weeks ago. This is an enormous play, and they have signed up some of the biggest partners in the world to sign up for this. So you've got some huge companies that have already signed up to build this. Right? So these are all partners that are contributing towards the agent-to-agent protocol. And I think you're going to start to see products rolling out of this. It's going to fundamentally transform the front end of payments. This is going to be a big bang, long fuse rollout. So I want to show you two key case studies in closing out, just looking at AI, and then I'm going to sum up and take some questions. So BlackRock is managing $20 trillion. How? They built something called Aladdin, and they built this with Microsoft. So they signed this deal with Microsoft. They've been building it for a few years, and basically they've just spent $100 billion building an AI data center to house this thing in. So Aladdin is now managing about 25% of the total wealth in the world is running through one piece of software. Right? It's now controlling the world's largest asset base. It's the #1 robot that controls more wealth than any country. No country in the world has this much wealth. And it's hailed as a game changer for BlackRock. So what does this thing do? It does all of this. It does compliance, trading, it manages their portfolio, handles credit, risk analytics, stress testing of the market, that is. It does performance and attribution. So in other words, I've invested, who do I allocate these profits to? And it does operations and reporting. So this is an amazing platform. It's amazing for me that nobody talks about this platform, because this is probably the biggest example of AI transforming the world that we know today. So it's basically a centralized source of data, with all of these tools, portfolio management tools, trade execution tools, etc. And so obviously there's still human engagement monitoring this, but this clearly has created a single version of the truth from a risk and profit point of view. The other example I wanted to give you was Apple. And people don't realize this, but basically, Apple has built a two-sided ecosystem where they've got merchant-facing propositions and consumer-facing propositions. And when you start looking at this, you realize Apple is really building a very unusual walled garden. And in fact, Apple is almost a bank without a banking license. If you start looking at Apple's strategy and everything that it's building, you can buy a phone, they'll fund the phone. When you get the phone, you can pay with the phone. And you start to understand, wow, this thing is actually turning into an entire bank. And what they've done, each of their products, Apple Pay, Apple Cash, Apple Card, Apple Pay Later, savings accounts, Care Plus, which is insurance, Tap to Pay, they've signed up with partners, and they are rolling out tech partners and banking partners. So Apple, and the trick here is you want to be a bank, but you don't want to be a bank, right? Because this is the point about the perverseness of regulations. In the interest of minimizing risk, you've over-regulated banks, and what you've done is you've caused this. This is what you've caused. You've now you've now enabled someone like Apple to become a bank without a banking license, and they're using all these other small banks, and Apple always chooses a small bank. I like to picture those small banks as a Bond villain's cat, the little cat. So, it's always the small bank. In the case of South Africa, it's African Bank. It's a small bank. It's a pet bank. I like calling it a pet bank. And so what every country Apple goes into, they get a pet bank. Just imagine, Bond villain with that little cat. That's the bank that they're using, all right? And you can start to see now, they then partnered with Goldman Sachs. And they have now taken a prominent position. Look at where Alipay is. Look at where Apple Pay is. Apple Pay is the second most used mobile payment system in the world. Nobody talks about this. Right? They're getting ahead of Google Pay, PayPal. And Apple, if you look at the penetration of their user base, 48% of their users are already using Apple Pay. Now look at PayPal, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay. Nobody is near this. So not only has Apple done a great job in building a payment system, they've got massive adoption, and they've got great penetration of their own base. Now, if you consider, Apple makes 80% of all the profit in the cell phone industry. I'll say that again. Apple makes 80% of all the profits in the cell phone industry, and they only have 18% market share. Okay, 1% market share in India, but 18% market share worldwide, 1% market share in Africa. 18% market share, 80% share of profits, right? There's no financial inclusion here. Apple's very blatant. We only want customers with money. So I'm too embarrassed to ask how many of you have Android phones. I will make a contribution if you have a GoFundMe. Apple unashamedly is saying we only want customers with money. So now you've got rapid adoption, rapid market penetration. You can see where this is going in their base, 70 million. Goldman Sachs had an enormous blowout. They had to exit this entire transaction because having launched this entire thing with Goldman Sachs, they had massive losses because of the way in which Apple had negotiated with Goldman Sachs. This was a terrible deal for Goldman's, and Apple's moved on to new partners. So what are the lessons, folks? I wanted to just walk you through this, take a few questions now. Key lessons, folks, is these are polarities. I think I spoke about the fact that there's a law in semiconductor design. We call it Makimoto's wave. And what that means is semiconductors get very customized or fragmented, and then 15 years later, they become very standardized. Then 15 years later, they become very fragmented again. Then 15 years later, they become very standardized. This is exactly what's happening in payments. We're seeing exactly the same thing in payments. You're going through this Makimoto's wave. It's a polarity. It's a polarity that can't be solved. You have to manage this. Right? So we have to manage this. I spoke to Pradeep about that this morning, and I said to him, there's a way to actually hold that middle line. We've got to figure out how to hold that middle line. Digital identity is a critical starting point. I'm very pleased to hear that we are doing that. All of the hyperscalers are looking for partners. You've got to decide, do you join their ecosystem, or do they join your ecosystem? Right? So you've got to decide whether you're a pet bank or not a pet bank. Is AI accelerating or disrupting? And the answer is yes. Right? It is accelerating and disrupting. Money is a means to an end, Don't focus on the payments alone, focus on the end. I quite liked what Stephen Cox said, which is actually they are focusing on credit. And if you listen to Stephen Cox, he never once said that they want a banking license. Right? So in other words, a company that started out with ATMs is now lending money without a banking license. And that is the model of the future. So credit is now moving towards non-banking organizations. So focus on the means to an end. You're going to have to make your money somewhere else. And start thinking about that, because payments could very well become free. Apple could decide tomorrow to make payments free. With that market base, they could kill your entire business. Remember, MWeb got wiped out because Google launched Gmail for free. And all of us sitting with MWeb accounts suddenly realize I'm paying 128 Rand a month for MWeb, and Gmail is free. Do you understand? Right? We were all paying 20 cents an SMS, and then WhatsApp said, free messaging. You will stop sleeping the days Apple says free payments. Do you understand? This is coming. There's no question in my mind, because a payment is just a messaging instrument. WhatsApp is a messaging instrument. Do you understand? Email address is for messaging. If you have a messaging service, it is going to be free. So if you've built an entire strategy on charging for sending messages, right, whether it's one-way messages or two-way messages, you need to understand that in 10 years' time, this might end up being free, not because of something you did, because of something they did. Okay? And because these guys are definitely, with that growth rate, I certainly think that Apple's going to take that path. Regulators are always behind the curve, always. So just be aware of that. You can't rely on the regulator to protect you. They don't even know what's going on. I mean, if there are any regulators in the room, I'm really sorry. I mean, let me just explain this to you. WhatsApp is running a telecom service, doesn't have a telecom license. Spotify is running a radio service, doesn't have a broadcasting license. And Netflix and YouTube are running TV services, and they don't have a TV broadcasting license. Do you understand that? Regulators have no idea how to regulate this stuff. No idea. And if they try to regulate it, someone's going to burn parliament again. Right? Do you understand? It now becomes impossible to regulate. It's too big to regulate. You see the problem? Right? So you should have regulated it when it first launched. Now if you come in and start to regulate WhatsApp, you're going to get blown up. So there's no single solution that works everywhere. And the EMV is a model that you can use, but it's going to be an integration layer in some reason. So I just wanted to share that with you and hopefully keep you awake for the rest of the weekend. I hope I've been able to do that. I want to just take some questions quickly. Here we go. From an inclusion perspective, how do we ensure that this doesn't deepen the digital divide? I think I explained. Apple doesn't care about the digital divide, right? Apple doesn't care. So we need to just get that part right. Google does, right? Google's trying to solve the digital divide problem. Facebook is trying to. And I think the good news is if credit moves, your next part of your question was credit and financial participation. Open credit enablement networks that allow you to share from a digital online vault your personal financial documents to any credit provider, I think is a brilliant way of solving this problem of creating access to credit. Right? And then we are going to have to start thinking about people who are not credit worthy, but they are debit worthy. And that's a big thing in Africa. We have many debit worthy services. 10% of all airtime sold by Telkom, MTN, and Vodacom is sold on credit. But there's no credit scoring. Nobody's all. You are selling prepaid credit. What is prepaid credit? Isn't that a contradiction in terms? The way that it works is, if you're running low on airtime, the telco sends you a message saying, would you like to borrow airtime? Now, if you don't repay it, it's okay. We make airtime. We can just make some more. Do you understand? We've lost nothing, right? But now 10, 15, 20% of our total airtime sales are sold to people who borrow airtime and borrow data. And the next time they top up, we take that money back and we charge them a convenience fee. It's not interest, right? So suddenly you've got a new form. We are talking about billions of rands of credit being issued in South Africa outside of the Usury Act, okay? So you need to understand that. And how did we do this? We did this by using psychographic profiling, not proof of address, proof of payment. So we're making microloans without all of that data. So that's how we're going to probably see financial inclusion happen. Big tech has focused scrutiny around data privacy. I think I've already explained to you. We've seen the end of privacy. How can African regulators balance innovation with protection? It's going to be very difficult, folks. I mean, you can pass laws, but the reality is there's always going to be gamification around the law, right? So we need to understand that. I mean, I've given you examples already of major players in South Africa who are operating what looks like a conventional business in an unconventional way. You see, customers want the verb, they don't want the noun. Two years ago, I explained this. They want the verb, they don't want the noun. I want to watch TV, I want to listen to music, I want to read the paper, I want to send money, I want to receive money, I want to borrow money, I want to invest money. I want the verb. I don't care if it's a wallet or an account or a policy or a provident fund or a preservation fund. I still don't know the difference between those two things, right? Those are such complicated nouns. Can you just take care of my pension? Save it for me. Right? Why do you invent these horribly complex words that nobody understands? So you got to start understanding that you got to start focusing on the objective. Don't focus on the object. And the problem is every bank I ever talk to in the world is an object-driven bank. It's all product-centric. They all have product houses. Nobody's looking at the objective. Focus on the customer's objective. Right? And that's what's going to solve this problem. In all the examples I've given you, companies were able to deliver on the objective by launching a different object, right? YouTube is a different object, but it satisfies the objective. Spotify is a different object, but it satisfies the objective. So that's how you need to think about this. Bitcoin is a different object, it satisfies the objective. So stop thinking about nouns, start thinking about verbs. How can African fintechs and banks leverage open banking? I love that question. Thank you, Steve. So that's a great question, and I think the answer to that is, we certainly have to adopt open banking. The problem that you have with open banking, and I think you heard it in one of the presentations this morning, is the more open you are and the higher the faster you are, the higher the risk. So the question is, how do we open without being too open, right? Because you want to open up your platform, but you don't want to open it up too much. I'll give you a good example. The problem that you've got with Airbnb and Uber is they expose you to the driver or the Airbnb host. Well, the minute I find an Airbnb host that I like in Cape Town, what do? I go straight to that person. I go off platform. So you've got to be very careful about how you bring third parties onto your platform. Because the minute you bring them onto your platform, I will go off platform, and all you've done is you've ended up acquiring more customers for the company that joined your ecosystem. So you need to understand that. That's a real problem. Uber has this problem. Whenever I land in a country and there's an Uber driver, if I like the way he's driving, I say to him, what are you doing over the weekend? Can you drive me around? And we go off platform. Right? Fashion industry has this big problem. If you have a fashion design business, they'll put you in touch with a fashion designer. If you like the fashion designer, you don't go back to the platform, you go straight to the fashion designer. So you need to understand that is a big problem in the world, is this ability to go off platform. So how can I think we've answered the digital identity question. PayPal International taken up crypto. Will that be taken up by the Reserve Bank, given that the Circle service is being utilized locally? So when you say crypto, you have to draw a distinction between NFTs, okay, non-fungible tokens, stable coins, and Bitcoin. As I've said, Bitcoin, we're not really sure whether it's gambling, an investment, or a currency. We're not really sure what this is. We don't really know. We know it's not a currency. We know it's something speculative. So the Reserve Bank's very unlikely to use Bitcoin as a currency. Now, a lot of people are saying to me, yes, but I can go to JP Morgan, they'll open an account, they've all opened up EFTs. Listen, if the house is on fire, sell hose pipes, right? Do you understand? Just because they're enabling Bitcoin doesn't mean they endorse Bitcoin, right? Everyone's enabling Bitcoin, but nobody's investing in Bitcoin. Go and look at the big organizations. They're not investing in Bitcoin. They're enabling. They're making it possible for you to speculate. They're basically building gambling portals. They're not themselves gambling, folks. People who run gambling shops do not gamble. They allow you to place bets, and they take a fee on the bet. The house never loses, right? And that's what all these banks have done. They've all built trading platforms that allow you to gamble, and they just make a fee and a return on it. And they're lending, they're issuing you credit to buy Bitcoin. So they are monetizing your madness, if you will, right? They monetize it. They're saying, that's fine. You speculate. We're not going to speculate. Our shareholders do not want us to see us. If a big bank goes out and says 10% of our liquidity is now sitting in Bitcoin, most investors would sell those shares. You cannot possibly put Bitcoin into your balance sheet as a bank, which means, but they're all very active in it. They're helping you move it, store it, save it, and actually they'll make good money out of it because 1/3 of all Bitcoin exchanges in the world have been hacked. 1/3. Now, if I said that about banks, you'd be shocked. Right? 1/3 of all Bitcoin exchanges, and why are the banks getting involved? Because they know how to run a vault. And all of these crypto exchanges do not. So it makes a lot of sense for a bank to get into that space. So although PayPal has taken it up, PayPal's merely building an engine for you to move this asset that you've chosen to own. That doesn't mean that they're endorsing it. Bold predictions for the banking sector, I think I've made a few. So that should keep you. You're not going to need coffee tonight. Okay, I can assure you of that. Regulatory changes, shaping banks' strategic priorities. Look, I mean, regulators, as I said, always be behind the curve. They're struggling to make sense of this. It's going to get even worse with AI because it's very difficult to predict with something like AI where this trajectory is going to end up. So I don't know how you regulate this. And remember, regulators can only regulate nouns. They can't regulate verbs. They can't say pay. Say, what do you mean pay? Are you regulating cash? Are you regulating card? Are you regulating EFTs? You can't regulate pay. You can regulate the instrument, but you can't regulate the verb. And this is the problem. There's so much of invention around building new verbs. Regulators are never going to be able to catch up with this. It takes 2 years to pass a new law. By then, we are 3 iterations down the road building a new product. You're seeing a lot of data risk and trust around AI systems. Let me make this comment. Bitcoin works because it is trustless. It's trustless, meaning Bitcoin